Do you love coffee? And do you also like to support our veterans? Well, I've got an awesome place for you guys to go. It satisfies both. Go to killtheenemycoffee.com. That's right, killtheenemycoffee.com. So what exactly is this? It's an active duty and veteran-owned small business. They're dedicated to bringing you this country's best tasting coffee through hard work and long hours of perfecting blends. Guys, I don't just promote this just because I want to promote it. I've tried it. It's awesome. And the byproduct, an awesome feature of it is you get to support your veterans. It's a small business. And that's what this country was built on, is entrepreneurial spirit and being able to start your own business and supporting veterans that have defended our freedom to be able to do something like this. So check out killtheenemycoffee.com. And yes, they obviously have coffee, but there's also some really awesome mugs. They have a Gladiator mug and a Kill the Enemy water bottle. Really, really high quality stuff, guys. Check them out. And by the way, the Kill the Enemy slogan, that means to conquer your demons. So check out killtheenemycoffee.com. So conquer your demons one cup at a time. So tax season may be over, but your issues with taxes may just be beginning. Don't forget, guys, the IRS can audit your taxes within the last 7 years. So if you have any issues or you think you may have issues with taxes, check out defensetax.com. That's defensetax.com. They can help you settle your IRS tax debt for a fraction of what you owe. They help remove interest charges and penalties, prevent or stop wage garnishments, remove tax liens, prevent and stop property seizures, and they can also prevent and stop bank levies. Defense Tax Group is a tax advocacy service dedicated to protecting individuals and businesses from the financial devastation that results from the IRS tax debt. And trust me, guys, there is nothing scarier than getting that letter in the mail from the IRS telling you that there is going to be an audit or that you have an issue with your taxes. An IRS tax problem not only affects your financial future, but can also jeopardize every area of your life. And that's not what any of us need, right? So check out defensetax.com, or you can give them a call. 866-657-1040. That's 866-657-1040.
Welcome to the WWE Podcast, your place for the most passionate wrestling analysis on the web.
Just turn Roman heel. What is WWE waiting for?
Another wrestling podcast put you to sleep. You can count on the WWE Podcast to keep you engaged and asking for more.
I've been watching wrestling for over 20 years, and that was one of the best matches I've ever seen.
If you're easily offended, this may not be the show for you.
Whatever happened to the men being able to physically retaliate against the women in WWE? This is a fantasy environment.
This is unlike any other wrestling analysis. So without any further delay, let's get the show started right now.
Welcome to the WWE Podcast on this Sunday, May 12th, 2019. Thank you, everybody, for joining me, and awesome show for you guys today. Really awesome. I am going to be speaking with Ashley Mann, who has been a co-host on this show a few times before. Always great to have her here, and we are going to be discussing our top 5 moments that changed the wrestling industry forever. And so very interesting, cool conversation. No, we do not have the same top 5 list. I will give you a spoiler right off the bat. We don't even have the same number 1. We only have a couple that cross over. So it was, and I'll be honest, Ashley's number 1 was very surprising, and I feel stupid for not thinking about it. It's like she outthought me on my own show. So thanks a lot, Ashley. But no, in seriousness, it's a really good conversation. I said this to her. I'll say it again, that it's always awesome to bring somebody on the show that is just well-spoken, and we're able to converse in an intelligent way on wrestling. And it's always a blast to have her on. So we discuss the top 5 moments of wrestling that changed the wrestling industry as a whole. And so we'll get to that in just a moment. But guys, thank you again for joining me. As the show continues to grow, I'm going to continue to bring you awesome content, even more awesome content than I have in the past. Longer shows, more co-hosts, which I'll be having another co-host this Thursday that is to be named. You will be hearing about that individual. You'll be hearing about or announcing it. I'll be announcing it on Twitter, which you can follow me on the way at the WWE Podcast. That individual will be coming on the show on Thursday, so you hear another new voice on the show to discuss Raw and SmackDown Live. So that'll be a lot of fun. And as I said, longer shows, more voices, and hopefully more shows. As I said, not easy to do. I got a hell of a full schedule, but it's on the radar to do because I know I need more audio for you guys. Longer shows too. You know, I don't want to make it hours and hours long, but you know, sometimes my 30 or 45-minute shows just aren't cutting it. So don't worry, I hear you, and that will be something I'm focusing on as well. And honestly, when you bring a co-host on, it kind of happens naturally anyway. You just continue to talk or converse. When you're conversing with people that you have great chemistry with, it just time flies, and you don't even realize that, you know, an hour and a half has gone by, and so that kind of stuff just will naturally happen. So instead of just hearing me drone on for hours, you will hear new voices, new content, and again, this top 5 format, which I've never done with Ashley. So guys, again, thank you. You can follow me on Twitter. You can follow me really anywhere that you have, or find me anywhere that podcasts are there. Apple, Google, Spotify, Spreaker, iHeartRadio, and anywhere else that is audio friendly and has podcasts. Likely I'm there. I hope anyway. So, all right. Well, that's the intro. That's the housekeeping stuff. Let's get right to it and not keep you guys waiting for the top 5 moments that changed the wrestling industry forever. Here we go. All right, everybody, welcome back. And I have a returning guest who is back on the show. And we are here to discuss our top 5 moments that changed the wrestling industry forever. So it is not an easy list to compile. I have a feeling we'll probably have 1 or 2 in common, but with so many moments throughout the wrestling lore history, I don't think that this is going to be a very similar list that we have. But that's the fun of it. So without further ado, Ashley, I want to welcome you back to the show.
Hey, thank you so much for having me. It's always fun to talk wrestling with you.
Definitely. And I think today, this is something I haven't done in a while, and it came from a suggestion from somebody on Twitter. Like, hey, you know, why don't you do a top 5? And I said, yeah, that's a really good idea. And, you know, top 5 lists are extremely subjective, and everybody has their own opinion on it. Everybody has their own 2 cents, and, you know, I probably have things on here that people go, why do you have that on your list? But that's the fun of this, and I'm sure that, you know, people will they'll probably agree with a couple of these, but as far as the order goes, this is going to be a lot of fun.
Definitely is. I'm stoked to see what your top 5 is.
So just so everybody knows, at least for my list, I didn't just keep it to WWE. There is a one out there that is kind of an outlier and outside the WWE scope. Kind of ironic, given this is the WWE podcast, but we are ranging this all the way through the spectrum of wrestling, and so I only have one that's outside the list, and this is very difficult to do. I'm really excited to get started, so let's just jump in. Ashley, what is your number 5 pick for the moment that changed wrestling forever?
Oh, making me go first. Okay, so now, full disclosure, I went full spectrum. I did not just zoom in on WWE, I went back in history too, so I kind of went all over the place. And I hate to start off on a negative, but if we're just looking at the wrestling business in its entirety, I went with the Benoit tragedy, not for the basic and what everyone would think reasons. I went with it because of the changes that happened after it, with the implementation of the wellness policy and wrestlers' health in general, and just how it changed everything from where you don't see chair shots to the head anymore or anything like that, just the safety measure that came out of that, and just putting wrestlers and their human beings in itself in first before anything else. So I went with that.
That's a hell of a pick. I will tell you that is on my list somewhere. It's not my number 5, but that moment was a moment that, as a wrestling fan, I didn't think was real. If I'm correct in recalling this situation. The week before, Vince McMahon had a storyline that he basically killed himself. I mean,
yes.
he got in his limo, shut the door, and the thing blew up. And the next week, he had to come back on the show and tell us about the tragedy of Chris Benoit. Now, that was obviously before they knew the details of the whole scenario, that he did what he did and killed his family and then killed himself. So, after that, they pretty much erased him from the memory of WWE. It's like he didn't exist. They took him off all of the pages on their website. None of his matches are contained in the WWE Network. He just doesn't exist, and rightfully so in some respects after what he did. But you're absolutely right. They brought in the wellness policy, just the view, how media vilified wrestling after that. They latched onto that like it was, they were a starving wolf in the middle of a forest in winter. They jumped on that because it fit with the narrative that they like to portray, that all wrestlers are on steroids, and this was because Chris Benoit had been ongoing use of steroids and it deteriorated his brain, which, this whole thing. So it really was a very dark moment for the wrestling industry as a whole, and no question about that.
Yeah, and I think WWE gets a bad rap when it comes to wrestlers' health, or I guess I should say up until that point, because a lot of the wrestlers, the majority I would say, didn't start in WWE. Mind you, before the wellness policy really took effect, who knows how many of them did steroids, but wrestling, for whatever reason, they were just vilified for it. All sports, I think, more so in the past, have had their issues with steroids and stuff like that, but I just feel like WWE was just crucified in the media because of it, and maybe, in my personal opinion, unfairly so. Yes, they could have done things prior to this, but no one could have ever predicted that scenario to happen. And for whatever, I know they've done research, and Chris Nowinski has done extensive brain research and concussions on it and things like that. So the horrible negative that it was, I think we have to look for the silver lining in all negative things that happen. And I hate to say it, but if anything good was going to come out of that horrible tragedy, I think this was one of the blessings that came from it. And I think it was kind of a blessing in disguise, because now they are focused on making sure wrestlers are safe and healthy so they can have a long, fulfilled life afterwards. So out of that negative, I tried to look for the positive, and I think that changed wrestling as we know it.
No question. And that is one and really the only bright thing to come out of this whole situation, was that it brought the wrestlers' health and mental health to the forefront of WWE. They were forced to now deal with it. It wasn't just, this guy who was retired for years and decades and, he ended up, committing suicide. I mean, this was an active competitor, one of their top guys in the business, one of the best of all time. Regardless of what he did outside of the ring, he was one of the best in the ring, bar none. To have it while he was active on the roster as a top guy, to do this and then have WWE not really knowingly recognize when it first happened, doing a whole tribute show to him and then backtracking and backpedaling. And it was a crazy moment, especially given 2 years before that when Eddie Guerrero passed away. It seemed like it was one right after the other. And obviously Eddie's was a much different circumstance. He had just a weakened heart from so many years of using pills and things like that. But this was a hell of a moment for all wrestling fans across the world. And I hope we don't see something like that again. But let me get to my number 5. This is just to bring the audience back up here, because I think this is one that will forever be in the minds of fans. If you're an Attitude Era fan, and I would think majority of you are, this was one of the biggest moments in that era, and that was Mick Foley winning the WWF title for the first time. And so my number 5 pick is that particular moment, and that's because, number 1, it was the turn in the tide of the ratings war with WCW and Monday Night Raw. This was the first time in, 82, 84, 86 weeks, somewhere in there, I don't know the exact number, that the WWF had beaten WCW Nitro in the ratings that exact night. And it was ironic because Tony Schiavone, who was on WCW commentary at the time, told everybody on there watching and listening to Nitro Mick Foley's, we've been told that Mick Foley's going to win the WWF Championship tonight. That'll put butts in seats. And what did they do? They had 500,000, or it might even be more, like 2 million people switch from Raw or Nitro to Raw to see that. So they inadvertently advertised the show for Raw because people wanted to see that. So it was a hell of a moment. On top of the fact that Mick Foley, who does not fit into the corporate mold whatsoever, I know they put that on air, but it's also behind the scenes. I mean, you look at Mick Foley, he doesn't exactly represent the poster boy for WWE at the time. Vince McMahon's obsession with the bodybuilding types did not fit Mick Foley's profile. And so, I mean, figuratively and literally, you had a guy that would, if you looked at him, he doesn't look like the paper champion that WWF would have wanted at the time. And to top it off, Stone Cold returned to help him do it and hit The Rock in the head with a chair, one of the biggest pops of all time. So that's my number 5. Ashley, what do you think about this moment?
Oh, 100%. That's actually one of my honorable mentions. It was kind of built into my number 2 pick, which we'll get to later. But yeah, as you were saying that, I was just reliving in my head just the feeling that I remember getting watching it and just seeing Mankind, Mick Foley actually just being the champion and just how surreal it was. Because if you just think of all the champions prior to that night, like you said, he definitely didn't fit the mold. And I think that was just groundbreaking. And maybe it doesn't get as much credit as it should in the sense that it changed who WWE viewed as their champion going forward. I think that kind of paved the way for wrestlers that we see now, like a Daniel Bryan or a Kevin Owens, maybe in a similar-esque type of fashion for Kevin. Just like not the stereotypical huge guy, bodybuilder, all that stuff. Just a pure, good wrestler, someone who loves the business. And take away what you want with Mick, but his characters, he was one of the best wrestling minds out there. And to see him finally get his opportunity and his moment was just amazing. And it definitely changed wrestling going forward.
Right, and Mick Foley is a perfect example of a guy that is showing you and shows the audience of today that you don't have to have $1 million body to be one of the top guys in the business. And Mick Foley understood the psychology better than anybody on that roster and could pull you into his character, and you didn't care that he didn't look like $1 million and he was right out of a GQ magazine. It didn't matter because his character was so compelling. And it was just one of the most amazing moments. Stone Cold returning, the tide turns. WWF does not look back, and they go on to obviously defeat WCW in the ratings. So let's get to number 4. Ashley, what is your number 4 pick?
Okay, so my number 4 maybe wasn't a moment in the TV sense that we all got to witness, but I think it changed the way WWE specifically did their business going forward, and that was when they went public as a stockholder in a actual public company that stockholders could buy and invest in, because I feel like maybe that may not get as much attention and maybe it doesn't get looked at as much as it should, because especially nowadays, I think WWE going public, Vince finally had someone to answer to, and especially after he purchased WCW, it was kind of his world. The whole wrestling industry in and of itself was his world. And he didn't have to answer to anyone. He could do whatever he wanted and no one would ever say anything to him. Going public, he had to be mindful of the product that he was putting on. And he had people to actually answer to now, because the stockholders and the people who were buying into the WWE as a brand and as a company had a little bit of input, because if the stock drops, then Vince has to take a look at that, and that negatively impacts him financially. So I think all the storylines and the characters and the direction of the company going forward, Vince had to actually pay attention to maybe a little bit differently and more so than he had to before they actually made the company a public company.
Very interesting pick. I did think about that. I would say that's also on my imaginary honorable mentions paper that I have here. And that is a huge moment. I think it's one that's overlooked by a lot of fans, that when you take a company public, like you just said, you're no longer answering to the internal management and internal voices. You have to listen to the Wall Street investors. You have to listen to the stakeholders, the stockholders. You have to listen to a much larger audience than you did when you initially when you stayed private. Obviously, the benefits of that are you have a hell of a lot more revenue coming in. That's how you can increase your capital in the company. I mean, I understand why they did it. And it's interesting that they waited 9 years to actually change it to a PG product when it happened in 2008. I believe it was July of 2008 when they went to the soft PG product. But I think that doing that was smart. I think they were in a extremely good financial position to do that. In the I believe it was October of '99 they went public, and so it was a time that I didn't invest in it, and I didn't think that it was at the time a smart investment, just because how many wrestling companies have gone public? I mean, it was just such an unknown. But when you look at it now, the corporate structure of WWE is just revolving around pleasing the stockholders. It's revolving around the financials that they release every quarter. And the negative of that is, well, now you are really trying to serve multiple masters at the same time, not just your live audience, but also making sure that the financials and the data that comes out to the shareholders and stockholders pleases them from a monetary perspective to show there's growth. The problem with that is that sometimes you sacrifice a better product for just simple increase in numbers to show that you are, quote, financially healthy. An example of that would be running a extremely long WrestleMania that is just absolutely exhausting for most fans, whether you're in the arena or you're sitting at home. I mean, you can barely keep your eyes open. I actually fell asleep during the main event that we've been building for 6 months. I actually fell asleep because I could not handle it getting that far into the show. But my point is that WWE is trying to please the stockholders by giving a super long WrestleMania, which increases the, quote, number of hours that people are engaged in the network to simply please please Wall Street. So the downside is that. Obviously, the upside is got a hell of a lot more revenue coming in than you do if you stay private. Exactly.
And I think whether them going public is a negative or a positive, of course, I'm not 100% sure, because no one truly knows all of their financials. But I think because at the time, WWE or WWF didn't need to go public, so their choice to do so was very eye-opening, especially now with me personally being older and being able to look back on it and just seeing the change in their decision from doing that. It's just amazing, because they didn't have to, but since they did, now, like I said, they do have to answer, and they do, whatever it is with their storylines. Just thinking back, like, for instance, the whole, I don't know if you remember, but the Trish Stratus and Vince thing where he had her, bark as a dog in the ring.
Yes,
yes,
very, yep.
Just simple things like that. And mind you, of course, that was a different era completely, and the world itself was in a different place then compared to where it is now. They could never get away with doing something like that. And I think maybe mainly so because of them being public and because they are a nationally traded company. I think if they weren't public today, they can maybe get away with doing something nowhere. Of course, nothing like that, but maybe just being edgier, because they wouldn't have anyone to answer to. So between that aspect and just advertising going forward, I just think that kind of changed the business for better or worse.
It absolutely did, and obviously there are pros and cons to both. I don't ever see them going back to being a privately owned company. I think that this is forever now going to be a publicly traded company. I can say that with extremely high confidence. I don't think Vince McMahon would ever backpedal at this point, and why should he? I mean, the company is experiencing, I wouldn't say record profits, because actually this quarter the profits are net losses. Net losses increased, and they didn't bring in as much revenue as they did this time last year, but when you look back over the whole span of since they went public, this has been a very financially smart decision by Vince McMahon, despite the downsides of creative, possibly suffering long shows just to appease the data numbers that people are engaged in the network longer because we're forced to, because you guys have longer shows. But things like that you do have a downside that people need to look at, that, hey, like, while we are the audience and the paying customer, they also want to look good on Wall Street, which can obviously degrade the product at times. So I'm going to move on to number 4, and this isn't that interesting because we just discussed it. My number 4 was Benoit's, obviously, double murder and suicide. Mm-hmm. I don't have a whole lot to add to this, other than just, again, it was just shocking. I remember and I was in a hotel room on vacation at the time, and I'm like, wait, what's happening? And it was just very, very jarring to see. You never assumed that Benoit was the perpetrator. You always just assumed that, oh my God, somebody broke in and killed his family. And when you look at the descriptions of how he did it, it's brutal. It's absolutely horrifying to think about what he did and how he did it. But like you just said, positive and shining light in this whole thing. Christopher Nowinski has done and dedicated his life to the effects of blunt force trauma on the skull and reoccurring concussions, which can degrade your brain cells, obviously, into a state that is no longer really, quote, you. So I really don't have too much more to add to this. Do you?
No, I think we've already pretty much covered all of the tragedy that came from it. But again, like you said earlier, just thinking about going back, because last night I was watching an old WrestleMania, I believe it was WrestleMania 16, and just seeing him in the ring with Kurt Angle and Chris Jericho. But on the description, it doesn't, like, Chris Benoit's name is nowhere. You just see Chris Jericho and Kurt Angle, and it's so sad and so unfortunate with what he did and the situation that surrounded that tragedy in itself. But again, like you said, the only silver lining in all of this was the wellness policy. And I think, of course, we would never want anything like that to ever even be a thought, let alone an actual happening. But the wellness policy in and of itself has saved so many wrestlers. I know Jake the Snake has benefited from it, and just so many countless wrestlers. So I think I applaud WWE for actually implementing a policy like this, because not a lot of other sports companies or leagues do that. So kudos to WWE in that aspect.
Yeah, I agree too. I mean, obviously the NFL has come under huge fire over the last 5 years for their lack of, I don't want to say caring, but lack of at least showing that they're trying to progress to make sure that these guys are taken care of, not just during the game, but long term. I mean, look at Brett Favre, who has been, his quality of life has gone straight down the tubes. I mean, he has admitted that, hey, like, I can't remember what I did yesterday. I mean, he knows who he is, but the repeated hits in the head are just unnecessary. But the only thing I would say, though, as great as WWE has been, I don't know why it took this massive and this magnitude of a tragedy to have them implement something like this. You wish that they would have just been proactive rather than reactive on this whole situation. But again, obviously it's in place now, and they have some of the top medical team, medical staff in the employed by WWE, and that's awesome. And how many countless lives have been transformed and saved because of this new wellness policy. So one question on this, taking it in a slightly different direction, do you think Chris Benoit will ever be inducted into the WWE Hall of Fame?
I don't. And it kind of hurts me to say that, because me personally, being a wrestling fan, I have always loved, yes, like the Extreme Rules and, those type of matches have always been intriguing to watch, and just to see what the human body can withstand in and of itself. I've always been more intrigued by the technical aspect, like your Bret Hart, your Chris Benoit, your Kurt Angle, just the technical aspect and the technical wrestler in and of itself, like the body of it. I've always been more interested and more emotionally involved in that, just to see what moves they can perform and just everything. It's just, that's always been more fascinating to me. But so that part of me totally believes that Chris Benoit should be inducted into the Hall of Fame had the horrible tragedy not happened. I don't think, especially with them being who they are as a company, I don't think they ever would, just because I think the backlash they would receive would be more detrimental than the reward that they would receive of actually inducting him into it. It's so heartbreaking to say, because he contributed so much to this business, but I don't think they ever would. What about you?
Yeah, look, I mean, it's impossible at this point. The argument would be, well, you're just focusing on his professional career. And if you just look at his professional career, 120% he should be in the Hall of Fame. Unfortunately, when you do something like this that is impossible to ignore or forget, you can't. You just can't as a publicly traded company. I know it's been 12 years. I don't think there's any amount of time that could pass that you'd put Chris Benoit in the Hall of Fame, because it would be forever stained by that memory of what he did. And it's unfortunate that, I mean, he has been scrubbed from WWE anywhere and everywhere you look. And I totally understand it. I don't blame them for doing that. They should. Regardless, even if they're not publicly traded, it just, what he did was so horrifying. You just can't untangle his professional career from his from what he did in his personal life. So I'm with you. I don't think they ever put him into the Hall of Fame. So number 3, and I'm going to go first this time. My number 3 is my WCW pick, and that is Hulk Hogan turning heel for the first time ever in his career with the NWO. He revealed himself as the 3rd member of the NWO, and it was. And look, I was admittedly a WWF hard fan for WWF. I never really got into WCW storylines. I wasn't really a channel changing guy. I was at first, and something about WWF just was a much higher caliber. The storylines were better crafted at the time. Things made more sense. The characters were more believable and intriguing than WCW. WCW just kind of be all over the place. However, obviously, even as a WWF fan at the time, I recognized the significance of this moment. I tuned in for this moment. I watched this moment. And it doesn't matter what wrestling fan you are. Everybody knows who Hulk Hogan is. I don't care who you are, what wrestling alliance that you follow. Everybody knows that name. And we all know he defected to WCW and came in originally as the yellow and red, and he was the white meat babyface, and people still loved him. And when he made this turn, it was one of the best turns that you could ever make, going from the top guy to the top heel. That's not easy to do. Even Stone Cold Steve Austin tried it at WrestleMania 17, and his heel run was a flop. I mean, he would even admit that himself. It was shocking. It was awesome. I think it saved WCW from the tanking faster. I think it was one of the most successful, without question, not even an argument. The NWO storyline was one of the most successful in the company's history, and was attributable to its success defeating WWF in the ratings for 80-some weeks. So this was shocking, and he just was able to make this work, and it was just awesome to see. What about you?
Yes, that kind of feeds into my number 2 pick, but I agree with you 100%. But for my number 3 pick, it was kind of a twofold. It was the ECW company and Paul Heyman, maybe a little twofold there. So I don't think without ECW or Paul Heyman that wrestling would have even gotten to an attitude era, because I don't think they would have, neither company, WCW or WWF at the time, would have had the gumption to do certain things that ECW was already doing. And ECW as a company and as a brand in and of itself, I think just generated this change in wrestling in and of itself, in the idea of wrestling. It was the platform for so many superstars. We got introduced to Chris Jericho, Eddie Guerrero, RVD, and countless other wrestlers. But I think too, with ECW, we saw when Shane Douglas won the NWA title, his promo after that, which he just completely obliterated the NWA and rechristened it the ECW title. From that moment on, I think that kind of changed wrestling as everyone thought of it. It was just so many different things built into it. And I think without ECW's attitude, I think in a way that was part of the attitude era change, because ECW was the exact opposite of WWF and WCW. I think that maybe catapulted everything else and kind of give it a base where, hey, we can be edgier. We can do things that a traditional wrestling company and wrestling match you wouldn't even think of. So I think ECW and Paul Heyman, speaking of him specifically, I don't think he gets enough credit that he deserves for changing the industry and the idea of wrestling as we know it. So that was my number 3. And really quick, Stone Cold, when he got fired from WCW, went to ECW, and Stone Cold, I feel, in my opinion, really found his voice there, really created his Stone Cold Steve Austin character there. And I think without him being confident enough to give the promos that he did and to voice his frustrations and his feelings, I think that kind of sparked something in him to be able to kind of hone in on his character going forward. And of course, once he got into WWF, they gave him the Ringmaster character, which was the complete opposite of Stone Cold. But I think that kind of maybe lit the fuse a little bit. And then by the time he got to WWF and was able to truly be who he was, he already had that confidence and that wherewithal to give that just heated promo and just to take his character to the next level. So that was my number 3.
I'll be honest, I didn't even think about that, so that's awesome. The ECW was, without question, I mean, yeah, obviously it went out of business, we all know that. And WWE's version of ECW was embarrassing when they had that back in 2008. Sure. It was absolutely embarrassing, terrible. So, I mean, I don't even count that. That was a not even a respectable representation of what it was. However, when it was back in the 90s, late 90s, early 2000s, when ECW was absolutely kicking ass, they were clearly the third brand. They were the number 3 out of the top 3, and there's no question about that. However, when you look at what they did, they had to differentiate themselves from WCW and WWF. They had to. They had to find something that was different. They couldn't be WWF or WCW light. They had to do something that was just so off of the rail and trail that both of these companies were on, and they found that. And it was hardcore. At times it was gruesome. Tables lit on fire. It was brutal, but super awesome to watch. The storylines may not have been crafted as well as WWF and WCW, but I don't think that mattered to a lot of fans because it was so hardcore. I mean, you look at what it was, and yeah, you could say, oh, it was mindless violence, but the guys that were in there, some of those names that were in there were not just meatheads. Obviously, as you just said, Stone Cold Steve Austin was born in ECW when he came in, and you mentioned all this, but he was able to just speak his mind and vent about what Eric Bischoff did, getting fired from WCW over the phone from Eric Bischoff. It was where so many stars were born. RVD, a staple, the Sandman. I mean, the list, Sabu, the list goes on. And these guys, while some were successful when ECW was bought out and kind of merged into WWE, some were, some weren't. I mean, RVD, I think, was one of the most underutilized talent in WWF. Obviously, he had a problem with recreational drug use and all that. I get that. But, that ECW was such an influential company at the time, during a time when violence on TV to that level was acceptable, and that was only 20 years ago. And you fast forward to today, people would be on the streets tomorrow with pickets and posters, and they're calling their local senators and assembly people saying, "Oh my God, do you see what they're doing on TV?" I mean, today's society is so much different. Whether you want to say it's progressing or regressing in some areas, it is what it is. But it was such an influential company at the time, and did I watch it faithfully? No, I didn't. Again, I was WWF through and through, but I wasn't ignorant and blind and tunnel visioned only to WWF. I knew what was going on, and some of the biggest names ever came through those doors, so I really like your pick there.
Thank you. Yeah, and just one more thing about it. I'm not sure if it was in the Paul Heyman documentary DVD itself or if it was in another DVD, but the phrase that always stuck out to me the most was when Paul Heyman said, "You accentuate the positives and hide the negatives." And I think that ECW true did that, because a lot of the guys like Bubba Ray Dudley or Devon Dudley or the Dudleys in general, as that faction in ECW, a lot of those names wouldn't have even been on a radar for WCW or for WWF at the time without an ECW, because yes, like we'll just take Bubba Ray Dudley for instance. Looking at him in the ECW days, he would not have even been a thought to a Vince McMahon or an Eric Bischoff at the time because he wasn't their mold. But you accentuate their positives and see Bubba Ray was a great promo. They were solid in the ring, their fundamentals, and I think Paul Heyman as a whole, he just really was the best at finding the positives and all the great things that wrestlers could do whether or not they physically on the outside looked like your stereotypical wrestler at that time and going forward, I think he just really found a way to implement the positives in each person and each wrestler and take them off to the moon from that point on. Whereas if you just looked at, for instance, Bubba Ray Dudley's negatives, he wouldn't have been. I just don't think that people like Bubba Ray or even RVD, where RVD wasn't the best promo, but he was solid in the ring, and that fan interaction that he had and just the emotion that those characters evoked out of you, I think that really just hit home with WWE and WWF, depending on the era, and WCW, and just really opened their eyes to, hey, yes, they may not look on the outside like your average wrestler or what you would maybe draw up to be the perfect wrestler, but they taught you how to find the positives in every wrestler and go forward with that.
I think that's what made ECW so attractive, is that you didn't have these guys that looked like everybody else on the other two major programs. You had guys that, some of them looked like the common man. And what do you think that most people can relate to? The common man or common woman. And it just made it so relatable and easy to watch. And you could tell that the promos that these guys were coming on the screen and giving, 9 times out of 10 were not scripted. You may have gotten bullet points from Paul Heyman saying, hey, here's the direction we want to go with your character, but the majority of the language coming out was the person inside speaking, not a script speaking for them. And I think a lot of guys appreciated that on the roster, that they did have that creative freedom to just fill in 95% of the blanks and be able to just be themselves. Because I think that's one of the most, I think, common arguments and complaints about WWE. Oh, it's too scripted in its promos. Well, you look at ECW, it was just the complete opposite. Did it always work? No. Sometimes the promos went off the rails. As you just mentioned, RVD was not the best promo for sure, but that didn't really matter because he had a connection with the fans that he could tell inside the ring. He didn't look like these jacked up guys that just, you can't relate to. He looked like a common man, and I loved it. And so I think that's what attracted a lot of people beyond I love the violence and the blood and the fire and the tables on fire and the barbed wire and all of that. Of course, that adds to it, especially if you are if you were a teenage boy at the time like I was. I mean, you look at that and you're like, oh, this is great, and yeah, there was that, but ultimately what's going to keep you to a product is something that you can relate to and be engaged emotionally, and ECW found that.
For sure, 100%. And just one more thing about that really quick. Like you said, I think ECW really gave the confidence in just being like your average person, because for me personally, I've never been the type to be attracted more towards like this built-up guy or this built-up girl, whatever you want to call it, and having them be the champion. Like, yes, it makes sense. Yes, like this guy is 6 foot whatever, 200 plus pounds, all muscle. Yeah, you would expect someone like that to be a champion, but I think ECW and Paul Heyman gave your average Joe and average Jane the option and the opportunity to be a superstar and to be a groundbreaking performer, because it's not all about how you look on the outside. It's what you can contribute to the business and to the match and how you can engage with the audience. So for me, ECW, and I, full disclosure, didn't really watch ECW much at the time, but just going back and doing my research and history and just seeing what ECW as a company and Paul Heyman contributed to the business, it really did just implement the fact that you can be an average person, but if your heart and determination and your work ethic is there, you can be whatever you want to be. So I think that kind of built into why I chose that as my number 3.
No, totally reasonable and good logic there for number 3. Number 2, I'm going to go first for number 2, and I'm going to say that Vince McMahon buying WCW from Ted Turner in March of 2001 is my number 2. And the reason for that is, well, I think the title speaks for itself. Vince McMahon bought his competition and then did an on-air storyline that mimicked that exact transaction. Obviously, Shane came out in Panama City Beach, Florida, and undersold Vince McMahon or basically signed the contract to buy WCW in storyline, saying that Shane bought it, not Vince. Obviously, Vince did. But it was just a surreal moment to see Nitro on Raw and Raw on Nitro. To see the video streams at the same time was surreal, and even beyond that, when Eric Bischoff was eventually hired by Vince McMahon as the general manager and they hugged on stage, that was surreal. There was just so much about that it's like, is this really happening? Like, what? I mean, Vince, did he really purchase WCW? It was awesome. Now, could they have done better with the talent they acquired from WCW? Of course. And I think in Vince McMahon, or Jim Ross, I should say, who was the vice president of talent relations at the time, has said multiple times that, the invasion storyline they wish they could have redone, and because they think they could have done a better job with it. Now, they couldn't bring in the big stars at the time. They were still under contract with guaranteed money that they had to let expire, which is why they didn't bring in NWO with Hall, Nash, and Hogan. At one time, they had to wait until Goldberg's contract expired with WCW to bring him in. So there was a lag in the time that they bought the company until the time that you saw them on WWF television, which I think was a bit of a letdown because you wanted to see those big stars come in. You wanted to see Goldberg versus Austin, which never happened. You wanted to see Hogan versus a top guy as well, and obviously we got Hogan and Rock. So it was a time that I think was surreal because the Monday Night Wars officially ended. The two streams at once was just mind-blowing to see, and obviously the talent acquisitions that WWF got at the time were just... It was cool to see WCW on WWF. I just think, and in retrospect, they know that they could have probably done a better job navigating the sea with those talent and exactly what to do with that storyline.
For sure. And again, that kind of plays into my number 2 as well, but I agree with you 100%. The whole idea of WWE buying WCW, at that time, I knew of WCW, but like you, I was all WWF. I knew there was another wrestling company on air, but I'm not going to say I didn't care, but I was all WWF for whatever reason, but I was just solely invested into them, and I wasn't one of the channel changers. I would be mindful, like, of course I did it occasionally, but I was just WWF all through and through. So for them to buy their competition was just mind-blowing to me. And then once I heard that, I kind of tried to do a little bit of research. Back in the day, there wasn't the internet that we have now, but I knew of the name of Eric Bischoff. So seeing him come on board years later was just mind-blowing. But doing research and knowing what I know now, the whole, I guess before I even go there, the whole invasion angle, full disclosure, I still go back and watch the Invasion pay-per-view from time to time today. So I was just intrigued, and just like the whole possibility of, man, like these WCW guys are actually coming to WWF and they're on the same channel and the same program and they're under the umbrella. Like, to me, I was just so young at the time. I was just like, man, this is crazy. What's going on? So for me, just being the age I was and not really knowing much behind the scenes or the whole business as itself, I was just like, man, this is so fascinating. And the Survivor Series they had, I think it was 2001, where it was the winner takes all. Like, I was so emotionally involved into that storyline and that angle. I was just seeing Austin switch brands, well, quote unquote switch brands, and be a WCW or Alliance guy. I was like, man, like, what if WWF loses? What's going to happen going forward? So for me, being the age I was and just in that frame of mind at that time, I was just like, man, what if WWF folds, or what if they beat the WWF? And obviously everyone knows that didn't happen, but I just remember me, maybe if you want to call it being naive, just thinking, man, what if WWF does fold? So that whole acquisition in and of itself was definitely game changing. And knowing now what we know with the contracts, because to me, like, I was never really a Hulk Hogan person. He was fine, I guess, but I was more like a Roddy Piper person. I loved like the bad guys for whatever reason. So not having Hogan or Goldberg or Sting didn't really matter to me as much, but the whole idea and the story behind it, like, it's WCW, ECW versus the WWF, like that is what engaged me. And yes, had they had the contracts not being there with Goldberg and Sting and all of them, it definitely would have been more implemental in that aspect. But I just remember that time and thinking, man, if WWF folds and they lose, like, what's going to happen? So I definitely just remember the feeling of, like, what if?
Right. And totally, yeah. I mean, I think that we just said it a couple times, but the fact that they didn't have the big stars come in off the bat that I think everybody wanted to see hurt the angle a little bit. But when it first happened, like you said, with the Invasion pay-per-view and Austin, who Vince McMahon actually was just hounding week after week. He wants the old Stone Cold because at the time he had turned heel or attempted to with The Rock at 17, and he was giving Vince McMahon hugs and singing him songs and having Deborah bring him cookies, all that kind of stuff. It was hilarious to watch. And you obviously had Vince, who tried to bring back the old Stone Cold, calling him out on SmackDown one week, begging him to give him a stunner. And eventually, he comes out the Raw before the pay-per-view, ends up clearing the ring with, I don't know, like 18 stunners or something, and ends up clearing WCW and ECW from the ring. Jim Ross is going crazy. Austin ends up turning heel again at the Invasion pay-per-view, leading ECW and WCW as their leader. And so you got that out of it. You got the what thing out of that angle, which still lives on 17 years later, to Vince McMahon's I'm sure, total despisement of that. And one of the negatives, I mean, the storyline, could it have been better? Sure. I didn't dislike it. In the moment, I really liked it. But when you think about now, as you just said, looking back with the knowledge you have now of what that whole thing meant, man, you think of what it could have been and what could have happened if everything, all the pieces were in place and the contracts were null and void and they were able to buy them out or bring them in earlier. They could have had some amazing moments with the top guys on Raw and the top guys from WCW. They could have really, really made it something incredibly special. But I still don't think it was terrible. I mean, the one negative I think you could say about the whole thing, at a macro level is, well, without WCW, now where do these guys go that WWF is not going to absorb and they don't want to bring onto their roster? I mean, that creates one less major area that these guys can go for work. And you could go on the independent scene, you could go to New Japan, you could go to Ring of Honor, but at that time, man, you take WCW away, and they only got, at the time, 2 hours of programming with Raw every week, and SmackDown 2 hours. They've only got X amount of time for these wrestlers, and a lot of guys, were out of work. And so that was the tough part, on top of the fact that when you don't have competition in any industry, the product suffers because you get complacent. So there's that too.
Yeah, and I think one more point to this topic before we move on, that people maybe either overlook or just don't really think too much into. They always say, oh, well, the Invasion storyline sucked, and of course everyone knew WWF was going to win and all that good stuff. Yeah, but I guess what I would want people to think of is, don't you think if WWF had the opportunity to bring in a Goldberg and a Sting and a Ric Flair and a Hulk Hogan and all those monumental characters at the time, don't you think they would have? And if they had not done the Invasion angle when they did, people would be crapping on WWF and Vince McMahon for not doing it. So I think in some frame of mind, in some aspect, they were kind of dealt like a bad hand, because they worked with what they had. Getting the wrestlers and the contracts that they could over, there was really no other option for them to get a Goldberg in. And yes, it would have been completely different if Eric Bischoff, Goldberg, Sting, and all those came over and were factors into the Invasion angle in and of itself, but they didn't have the option to because of the contracts that WCW and Ted Turner had signed with those guys. So I think with the cards that they were dealt at that time, they did the best that they could. Yes, in hindsight is 2020. They could have maybe tweaked a few things or done things better or used different wrestlers in certain spots. But at that time, what they did was probably, in my opinion, the best option and the best storyline that they could have done. Because had they not done it, everyone up until this day would have been like, oh, well, they bought WCW. Why didn't they do some type of Invasion angle? Or why didn't WCW, the name in of itself and the brand, and ECW, because they were part of the alliance, why weren't they a factor? Why didn't they do something with it? And I think people just don't hone in on the fact that they didn't have the option to, because, of course, Vince McMahon would have done whatever he could to make that storyline bigger than life in and of itself. But with the cards that he had, I personally think he did he did the best that he could.
Yeah, I think that's a fair statement. And like you said, if they could have brought those individuals in, why the hell wouldn't they have? They're
Right.
the biggest names in wrestling ever, and so why wouldn't they have? So I think the timing of it was just unfortunate, and if they couldn't get them out of the contracts, or if WWF didn't buy them out of the contracts, whatever the situation may be, it's just unfortunate that there was a big delay in the invasion to the bigger stars coming through. With obviously the whole NWO and Goldberg coming on later, and Sting much later in 2015 or 16. So, we all eventually did get those guys. It just wasn't at the time that it could have been at the hottest and at its peak and really make things explode. But I didn't hate it. Some people totally crap all over this too, and I don't understand why. I liked it. Could it have been better? Sure, everything can be better. But I think that when you listen to some of the wrestlers and former management announcers talk about it, they said that things got really watered down. They wouldn't have done that. Where they, for example, bringing in WCW referees for WCW matches and WCW announcers for the WCW matches with guys. I mean, it got very convoluted, and having to bring in their own teams for their particular matches, it just got a little convoluted. And it's like, well, why do you have to do that when WWF is the programming you're on? Why can't, it just got very confusing. And you have Nick Patrick, who I actually loved. Nick Patrick, who was the WCW referee, he ends up being a crooked referee, and it got a little bit convoluted from that perspective, for sure. So, all right, let's move on to your number 2. What is it?
So my number 2 was the creation of WCW Nitro in and of itself. I think without the creation of Nitro, none of this would have happened. Everything that we've discussed going as of this point would have even happened. I think Eric Bischoff was a monumental figure in person and character into the Attitude Era and wrestling going forward as it is today. I think Nitro really sparked everything, because without Nitro, we wouldn't have had a Hulk Hogan heel turn. We wouldn't have had Hall and Nash jumping ship from WWF to go to WCW. And I think without Nitro being what it was and putting down that foundation, we wouldn't have had, some people say we wouldn't even have wrestling as it is today. So I think WCW just being created and going head to head and taking that gumption and just taking that leap of faith and even presenting the slightest form of competition in the beginning to WWF, we wouldn't have had the Attitude Era. I would be kind of curious to see what wrestling would be as it is today, because I don't think without Nitro that we would have, maybe we wouldn't even have a WWE, or at least as it is that we know it. So I think Nitro just gave the platform for everyone. Hogan turning heel, Hall and Nash jumping ship, the Attitude Era, the Montreal Screwjob, everything. I think without Nitro, none of those other factors would have even existed. So that was my number 2.
That there's no argument there that Nitro, as successful as it was the best thing that ever happened to WWF. Nitro forced Vince McMahon to push the creative envelope, to make things better, put the pressure on themselves, because they had true competition. Not pretend competition, but true competition with an owner that had deep pockets and a will to win. And Ted Turner kicked Vince McMahon's ass for 86 weeks and proved that he did. And obviously they made some big mistakes in their 7-year tenure, and they had some massive managerial problems in WCW up and down the line. Obviously, with Eric Bischoff taking over, he had admitted, and I listened to his show as well, that Thunder was the death nail for the WCW brand, because it ended up watering down everything that they had done through the week. It's 2 more hours of television that they have to run. They were stretching their crew super thin, so it was just to Eric Bischoff's point, WCW Thunder was the death nail in WCW's life, and I totally understand that. But to your point, Nitro was beyond successful and it had deep pockets, and it was the best thing that have happened to WWF at the time. And I did not watch the first episode of Nitro. I know that Lex Luger made his debut at the time, who had jumped ship from Vince McMahon's company. It was a significant moment in history, and it provided a true platform for guys to go work, and they were successful for 7 years. So, obviously they ended up being bought out, but yeah, totally agree with your selection here.
Yeah, and I think without WCW and Nitro, specifically Nitro, I don't think that anything would have forced Vince McMahon or the WWF to change the landscape of their company. I think maybe over time, eventually, they would have changed some things up because there's only so much you can do with like gimmick characters. But I don't think they would have had the sense of urgency to take a look at their product, their characters, who their champion is, the storylines, and everything in a whole, and really just revamp everything. I don't think they would have had that spark, the sense of urgency, anything. I just think that Nitro really shook the wrestling genre in and of itself to a core, and I think Eric Bischoff, kind of in my opinion, like Paul Heyman, maybe doesn't get enough credit that he deserves, because without Nitro, WWF at the time, WWE now, they may have just stayed the course and just maybe played it safe and, okay, we're making profit here. We really, everyone likes what we're doing for the most part. It is what it is. But I think that really pushed WWF and Vince McMahon to look at their product and just take it to the next level and just go to the full extreme that they could have and made it this global brand that we know of now.
No, absolutely. Whether or not you like WCW, didn't or did not like their product, it doesn't matter. The fact is that whenever you have true competition, it always forces you to raise your game. I don't care whether you're in the wrestling business, whether you're in an Olympic sport, even at your work. When you see somebody doing a better job than you, most of the time, it makes you feel like you have to raise your game. I mean, that's true on a micro or macro scale. And my analogy of that means that could AEW, could they be the next WCW to WWE? Maybe. They haven't had a single show yet, and I know this is not about AEW, but I'm thinking about that analogy, and I'm thinking, could this very well be the next WCW competition to WWE? I mean, you have very similar workings here. You have an owner that has very deep pockets, and that's super important when you're bringing in any wrestling company to make it feel like it's true competition. You have to have deep pockets. That's a massive barrier to entry, so check there. You have a hell of a talent roster, and it's not just filled with ex-WWE handoffs or rejection. It is their true talent. They're bringing in talent that is not just the people that WWE let go. It's not TNA. They are, I think, going to be a formidable opponent for WWE. I don't think they'll ever overtake WWE. I think that's right now kind of a foolish thing to say, but it could very well be a very similar path that AEW takes to WWE.
For sure. And I hear a lot of people commenting on, AEW is going to run WWE out of business and all that stuff. And of course, we don't know for sure, but my personal opinion, I don't think that's even the mindset behind like an AEW company or an ROH or any other company since WCW up until today. I think any type of competition for any company in the grand scheme of all sports is what you need. And I think that WCW is what first sparked and proved it could be successful. WCW beat WWE for 83 weeks or however many weeks it was, and that proved that it can be done. So I think competition in and of itself is just going to be best and what we all should hope for being wrestling fans going forward in the future.
Exactly, and people always like to, wouldn't you want to see this company out of business? Why? I want as many wrestling companies as possible. I don't want it to just be WWE's presentation of what professional wrestling is. I mean, I've seen it. I've watched their presentation and ideology of these rise of organizations that are, particularly AEW, that are going to be, I don't even want to say competing with WWE because I don't think that should be their goal or focus at all. But I'll just say it because I don't have a better phrase. These companies that are going to be competing with WWE, particularly AEW, I don't think there's a better time in the world to have these companies emerge, because they recognize the faults and the weaknesses of the large WWE landscape and what the fans are complaining about. They have an opportunity to start fresh. They have deep pockets. They have a talent roster that, again, is extremely formidable, and they are going to apparently being allowing these talents to just speak their minds within reason and just have the creative freedom to do so. And again, I don't think, as you just said, that this is not a bad thing that you have wrestling companies wanting to get into the game here. I want as many as possible in the game, because not only does that provide more competition, but it provides more opportunities for work for these guys as human beings to support their families. I mean, that's an element too. I don't want to see any company that's wrestling related go out of business, because if you're a true fan of professional wrestling and you love the product, you should never root for any organization wrestling related to go out of business, because that's never good for the market as a whole. And so there, I think I've made my point. So, any other final thoughts on this, Ashley, before we get to our number one?
No, I think we've covered it all. So what's your number one?
Oh, okay. My number one, and I feel like you're going to go, that's mine too. The Montreal Screwjob. Montreal Screwjob is number one for me. That changed the wrestling industry forever. And the reason is, I think, trifold, if you will. We got the Mr. McMahon character out of the Montreal Screwjob. One of the hottest, if not the biggest heel in WWF history was Mr. McMahon. To this day, even, he can still be that guy. So we got Mr. McMahon, which obviously was the foil for Stone Cold Steve Austin in the biggest money-drawing rivalry in the history of the company. To this day, still is the biggest money-drawing rivalry in history. So we got Mr. McMahon. It also exposed the business, which this is where we're talking about the change of the industry here. It exposed the business in a way that it hadn't previously had been done. Yes, we had the curtain call the year before. We know that. We know what happened with the curtain call with Kevin Nash, Shawn Michaels, Triple H, and Scott Hall in the middle of the ring in Madison Square Garden hugging each other, even though they were not all supposed to be friends, which a lot of older guys on the roster, management didn't like it, but apparently was approved by Vince McMahon. But anyway, we got that before in a non-televised event. And now we get the Montreal Screwjob that is infamous in wrestling lore. Doesn't matter what brand you were watching, you know what the Montreal Screwjob was about. Bret Hart did not want to relinquish that WWF Championship to Shawn Michaels before he was leaving, and they obviously did not agree when they went out to the ring, and you had Shawn Michaels in on it, applies the sharpshooter. Vince McMahon comes out, calls for the bell after Michaels put Bret in the sharpshooter, and then we get a very, very pissed off Bret Hart, who spits in the face of Vince McMahon, spells out WCW with his hands, and appears on WCW television shortly thereafter. And the not only that, we had that whole event. Bret Hart actually punched Vince McMahon in the face after that whole event, and he had a bruise just below his eye for weeks after that, because, I mean, that's well documented and it's all been discussed. But Vince McMahon comes on and has an interview with Jim Ross in the weeks after that, saying that Bret screwed Bret. I mean, that's another extremely recognizable phrase that came out of all of this, and it just exposed the business and pulled back the curtain in a way that had not been done to this level before. And since that time, you can really point to that moment and say, yeah, like, when did kayfabe start to die? And you could say the Montreal 1997 was that moment. You could make an argument for that. So that's my number one. And also, before I toss it to you, it heated up the WWF WCW rivalry at the time. I mean, we just covered it in length there, but it added to that rivalry because you had Bret Hart going to WCW after this was over, and you had to have Vince McMahon explain what happened. Bret Hart shows up on Nitro, which brings some viewers in to see what he's going to do. Is he going to address this situation? Who's he going to feud with? What's going to happen? So it heated up that rivalry, which just sparked both fan bases. And so it was just a moment that is still surreal to this day. I mean, we don't have anything to this day, 22 years later, that you could say has rivaled that moment and exposed the business to that level where Vince McMahon comes out in a shoot and calls for the bell because he wants to make sure that the belt stays in WWF and that Bret is not, going to be bringing it to WCW. It just exposed the business. We got Vince McMahon. It heated the rivalry between the company and fan bases, and it was just it was a crazy moment for any wrestling fan.
100%. And I totally agree with you. I think without the Montreal Screwjob, a lot of what wrestling we know of as today wouldn't be what it is without that moment. And it's so crazy to think of that one moment changing wrestling in and of itself, but it really was monumental because I remember Bret Hart doing, like you said, the WCW in the air, and I just remember thinking, like, man, like, why is he doing that? Like, why would he do that on a WWF show? Like, that, because to me, I think like maybe 5 or 6 at the time, so of course I didn't really know what was going on, so I was just like, WCW, and I remember writing it down and thinking, wow, like, why is he doing that? Like, he shouldn't be doing that. Like, it was just mind-blowing to me, and like you said, that did spark the Mr. McMahon character, and who knows if Stone Cold Steve Austin would have been what we know of him as being today. Who knows if he would have been that groundbreaking figure and character without the Mr. McMahon character, because Mr. McMahon, any two people need a good opponent to brace off of and to play off of, and I don't think that without the Mr. McMahon character in and of itself, I don't think Stone Cold would have been what he was without that character to play off of. So I think that definitely did spark the change in just the groundswell that WWF experienced at that time without the whole Montreal Screwjob taking place. So I totally agree with you there. But that was not my number one pick.
Well, then let's not keep the listeners waiting any longer. What is your number one pick for the wrestling moment that changed the industry forever?
So, I'm sorry, this is probably going to be a letdown for a lot of people, but there's a lot of different avenues that branched off of this. So, mine, I like to think that I'm a wrestling historian. I love the business behind the TV show, more so than what we see on TV. I'm just infatuated with what the business is and everything that goes on behind the scenes. So I took it way, way, way back and took it to the point where Vince McMahon bought the company, the WWF, from his father and took it national. Because I feel if he didn't buy the company from his father, we wouldn't have had a WrestleMania 1. And I think the first WrestleMania really did lay a foundation and just give a groundswell to wrestling as an industry and take it to unbelievable amounts that it is now, because WrestleMania is like the Super Bowl, and a lot of, for instance, my coworkers, a lot of them don't really care about wrestling. It's like, oh, that's fake or whatever, like they're not really hitting each other, whatever. But they know of WrestleMania. They know what WrestleMania is. They know Hulk Hogan. So I don't think if Vince took reins from the company, I don't think we would have wrestling as it is today. I think him actually buying that company from his father gave the opportunity for everything that we know today. I think without him buying that, we wouldn't have WrestleMania, we wouldn't have wrestling on TV, we wouldn't have a Hulk Hogan, we wouldn't have a Monday Night Raw, we wouldn't have SmackDown, we wouldn't have the company that we all love. Of course, there's a lot of faults and we can nitpick and everything like that, but Vince McMahon really gave us the opportunity to do that, to have us speak on a podcast today and just have us love the company for what it is in and of itself. So I think Vince McMahon, for all his faults, everyone has faults out there, but he gets a lot of heat and a lot of negative remarks and things like that. But I think him buying the company, taking it national, buying out all the other territories, which back in the day was unheard of, and he was vilified for it. And I think that may have been like the start of the heel Vince McMahon character, not on TV, but behind the scenes. That gave him the spark and the motivation and the confidence to put on a WrestleMania 1, to get to WrestleMania 3, to bring in a Hulk Hogan and have Hulk Hogan versus Andre the Giant for the championship, and to have that monumental moment that we still see replays of today where Hulk Hogan body slams Andre the Giant. I don't think any of that would have been possible without Vince McMahon taking full reign of the wrestling industry in and of itself, saying, hey, thinking probably to himself, hey, I'm going to be a bad guy to a lot of these people. I'm going to do things that a lot of people aren't going to be happy with, and just embracing all of that and building wrestling to what it is today, and just giving us this platform and this outlet to just fully disregard everything else that's going on in our everyday life, and just saying, hey, yeah, Monday Night Raw, it's 3 hours now, shouldn't be 3 hours, whatever. But it gives you that escape from reality and gives you that opportunity to just disengage from your everyday life and just be indulge into something else. And I think without him taking that leap of faith way, way, way back in the day and being confident in himself and taking ownership of the company and building and risking everything that he had for that first WrestleMania, and it being as successful as it was, to move on to WrestleMania 35 and for whoever knows how long that we're going to be able to enjoy WrestleMania and wrestling in and of itself for the years to come. So I think Vince buying the company from his father really changed wrestling as we know it, because if he hadn't, who knows if we would even have wrestling today as we know it. And I think him doing that really proponed everything else, to have a Monday Night War, to have a Stone Cold Steve Austin, a Hulk Hogan, The Rock, and all of the characters that we love to this day.
I did not expect that one. But no, I think that, and I don't think anybody probably had that on the list. There's so many other moments out there. I was thinking, oh, she's going to pick Andre the Giant being slammed by Hulk Hogan or something. And that is something I didn't think of, and that's why we have these lists, because it's those moments that you don't think of necessarily, and that are hidden behind the scenes, and especially for something that happened so long ago, that is a ripple effect into 2019. I think the answer to your question is no. We would not have the same professional wrestling that we have today had it not been for Vince McMahon. Regardless of whether you hate or love the product right now, and it's definitely got its faults, we wouldn't have been blessed with all of those moments that were iconic throughout the 70s, 80s, and 90s. Without Vince McMahon having the vision to take it from a regional to a global phenomenon. I mean, that's just the facts. You have somebody who had the vision to take this global that nobody else had the balls to do, and that's Vince McMahon. And you have a lot of people who hate, as you just said, vilify Vince McMahon because he did that, and the territories, a lot of them dried up because of the fact they couldn't compete with Vince McMahon, who had put himself on cable television, which was not cheap to do, and put a product out there that's different. And Vince McMahon was able to adapt and change to the times and take advantage of the technology and the mediums and platforms that he could, while the other territories were still kind of stuck in the past and not willing to change, which I think the argument could be that Vince McMahon didn't kill the territories killed the territories. And if they were able to do and take the same steps that Vince McMahon had taken, they may have survived a little bit longer, or maybe even thrived. Who knows? But Vince is the only one with the pockets, the guts, and the vision to do it and take it global. And he was extremely successful in doing it, regardless, as you said, of the faults that he has in his personality, which are many. He was a genius, an evil genius, as he's been described. He took it from regional to global and was beyond successful, more than anybody has ever been in this industry. Vince McMahon is inarguably the single most successful person in the wrestling business. And there's absolutely nothing that anybody could argue against that. It's not even an arguable point. So that's a really good pick, because it's almost a pick that is unfair, because it's one that's I think the ultimate, right? I mean, it's the ultimate one that changed the industry forever. And you obviously have, as you said, all these television moments, but behind the scenes, had Vince McMahon not done this, we wouldn't be talking right now. We wouldn't even know what Monday Night Raw is. We wouldn't know what SmackDown is. We wouldn't know what Stone Cold, Hulk Hogan, or The Rock even meant. I really do believe that. So that's a really good number one pick.
Yeah. Well, thinking, I know it's probably not one of the most interesting or the most intriguing to wrestling fans today in today's age, but to me, when I was sitting down and going through my list and just thinking, like, for whatever reason, for me, the first thing I thought of was, okay, well, where was wrestling back in the day, and how did it even get to this point where I can talk to you, I can meet fellow wrestling fans and establish very good friendships off of this product where it's quote unquote scripted, because for everyone knows that wrestling, I don't like using the word fake. It's scripted. Everyone knows that, especially nowadays with the internet and everything like that. But for me, when I sat down to make my list, I was like, well, man, like, how did we even get to this point? So I did some research and went back to the very beginning and just thinking, had Vince McMahon not taken the option and maybe even just I don't even know how to say it, but just the risk, I guess, in making that first WrestleMania, what would have happened? Because if we didn't have WrestleMania, we wouldn't have had all of the superstars and the characters and the personalities that we have today. And had he not taken that chance, who knows where wrestling would be? We may not even have a wrestling on TV or be able to talk about wrestling. And I know that wrestling, for me personally, has brought me so many different friendships and just helped me through a lot of times in my personal life. So I think that's where when I sat down to think, man, what is my top 5? I did some research, watched some DVDs, of course, because I just love the documentary aspect behind all of wrestling, and I just really zoned into what Vince McMahon did in the 80s and the early 90s, and he revamped the whole industry that they knew of at the time and created what we know of to this day. So that's why I chose that as my number 1.
I can't argue with it, and I love that. As fellow wrestling fans, everybody knows that you have friends or family that rip on you for being wrestling fans. Oh, I mean, it comes with the territory. It's synonymous with being a wrestling fan. Oh, you like that stuff? And I just say, you know what, like, it's scripted. Or, as you just said, it's fake. I don't say the word fake either, because I feel like it's insulting to the men and women. It just feels wrong to say, and so. It is scripted, but you know what else is scripted? Game of Thrones. And that
exactly.
And I'm going to be indulged and engaged in that in about 35 minutes, and I'm going to be just lost in the world of Westeros. And I'm going to not care about my life for an hour and a half while I watch it. And I think that the 15 million people are going to join me doing that. And you don't hear people say, oh, you like that Game of Thrones stuff. For whatever reason, wrestling has this bad rap that doesn't come along with any other scripted form of entertainment, movies, TV shows. Wrestling is its own animal because it has these notions that are just attached to it that, it's fake. These guys are just, jumping around in their underwear. That's all fake, right? Well, yeah. Well, first I would say, yeah, no kidding. It's entertainment. Like, we know that what we're watching is simulated combat. So this argument with wrestling gets a bad rap when you could make the same argument against any other TV show or movie in the history of TV and movies. So it just comes with the territory, but that is a hell of a pick. I'm really I'm surprised, but I like it because it's the origins of what professional wrestling is now, regardless of, it's a much different product now, but had it not been for those seeds being planted and Vince McMahon's vision, we would not be here today. So, any closing comments that you have?
I don't think so. I guess the only thing I could say, maybe going a little bit off topic here, but with like the ratings and everything like that, and I listened to your previous podcast about the ratings, it kind of bums me out, especially with, and I guess it's a combination of everything with social media and the internet being what it is. I think wrestling really gets a bad rap, and of course, is the product what I would maybe prefer 100% of the time? No, but for whatever reason, wrestling fans and other podcasts, not you, other podcasts, they just zone in, the show is horrible because the ratings are whatever it is now, but we still tune in. We still are emotionally invested. And I think sometimes we just forget to enjoy wrestling for what it is. It's our escape from reality. It's the longest episodic, whatever their tagline is, show on TV. And maybe not always zone in on the negative aspects of it, but just remember why you love wrestling for what it is. Because wrestling is the escape from reality for me personally, for my everyday life. Like, I know, yes, the 3-hour Raw is sometimes, like, oh man, I have to watch from 8 to 11. Sometimes, even sometimes after the first segment, I'm like, oh, I still have another 2.5 hours. But we just need to remember to appreciate wrestling and appreciate why you got into wrestling in the beginning and from all the characters, and just maybe not be so negative on it and just look at the positives too. Like, a lot of people would crap on the Bray Wyatt angle and his Firefly Funhouse and all that stuff. And I'm gonna admit, at first when I saw that first vignette, I was like, gosh, what is this? Like, why are they doing this with Bray? But I've really grown, and after I watched it 2 or 3 times after that, I was like, man, like, they're revitalizing his character. So wrestling is a story. And yes, we may not like it 1 week or 2 weeks, or the ratings may be down, but don't hate on it. Like, for me, for instance, like, some of my favorite sports teams aren't really the best going forward through the whole season and everything, but just remember why you love that sports team. And for me, that's what I do with wrestling. Like, yeah, this week's episode sucked, whatever. It's not what I would have done, or I would have done this, and this, and it's easy for us to comment on it, but just remember why you fell in love with the wrestling industry in and of itself. So, just my personal take.
I think that's something that needs to be reiterated across the board for all fans, me included. There are times, you sometimes just gravitate to the things you don't like. I don't know if that's human nature, the society we're in, or whatever, that we always just kind of gravitate towards the critiques and things like, oh, that sucks, this is awful, what are they doing? And, you have to just be mindful of that and say, hey, like, well, why are you watching this if you hate it so much? Yet we keep coming back. We keep coming back week after week. And there are shows out there that just rip WWE for everything, up and down, all the time. And I try to be mindful of the things and bring in things that I like about the show every week, and not just slam them for stuff that's just blatantly awful. But the flip side of that is, a lot of times WWE is deserving of the critiques they get. They're a professionally run organization that has these, high-paid writers that are just coming up with just garbage. And there are times and they are deserving of the critiques and criticism at times. But like you said, we all were drawn to wrestling for a reason. Generally, if you're a wrestling fan, you stay a wrestling fan. That's why wrestling fans are some of the most loyal fans of any form of entertainment ever. And that's why we have to remind ourselves, when we have terrible writing and you have terrible presentations of what professional wrestling is in Vince McMahon's eyes on a weekly basis, or you have segments that are eye-rolling or disengaging or childish or whatever, you have to just remind yourself, like, this is my escape from reality, as you said. And you, as disengaging as it may be at times, where you are just completely disconnected because of the garbage they put out, you have to just force your brain to look at the things that are what continues to draw you there every week. And it shouldn't be a negative reason to just say, oh, I'm going to watch it so I can just create my own podcast and just kill them every week. It should be, and I think most fans are, they watch it because they like the wrestling inside of the ring. They like the stories. Any good form of entertainment is a story. They tell them their stories inside of a ring. Some stories are told outside of the ring and via promo. Whatever the vehicle you're using to tell that story, you want to get lost. How do you get lost? You get engaged. And I think that is some of the critiques WWE has right now is, oh, they're not engaging, they're not believable. And yeah, no question, that happens, and it happens a lot. And I'll admit that the WWE has just an Achilles heel when it comes to being something in a form of entertainment that consistently engages me. It kind of takes me in and out, in and out, in and out, in and out. And I have to remind myself that, like, hey, I may not like this, but I'm here because I love this product, and I don't care what WWE does. I will always be a fan for life. That's just the way it is.
Couldn't have said it better myself.
All right. Well, on that note, on the high note, because I'll end on a high note, Ashley, before you head out here, let everyone know how to get a hold of you on Twitter.
All right, so my Twitter handle is ASHMANNS. So you can follow me there. I normally just retweet a lot of things, not really anything that groundbreaking. But yeah, I love to talk wrestling with anyone, especially you. This is always very entertaining for me and just very kind of therapeutic sometimes when we talk about wrestling, whatever's going on in the wrestling world. But yeah, feel free to follow me there. I'll talk wrestling with you, talk whatever. So yeah, feel free to hit me up.
No, and that is the truth. It's not just a plug. She will talk wrestling with you, so be careful.
I will.
Totally understand. It is a therapeutic session for me too, because there are not a lot of people I can intelligently discuss wrestling with. At least in my day-to-day life, it's hard. My wife is not a wrestling fan. She knows like who The Rock is. She likes The Rock because he's sexy, I guess. I don't know. She likes the big name people. She'll come around when WrestleMania rolls around, so I don't have a lot of day-to-day interaction with people that I can discuss wrestling intelligently with. So totally understand it. This is a therapeutic session for me. I feel like I'm laying on a couch and I have my psychologist sitting there with a pad of paper and I'm able to just vent about wrestling. So Ashley, as always, it's been an awesome time and we will definitely be doing this again.
Sounds great. Thank you so much for having me. I appreciate it.
Yeah, no problem. Take care.
You too.